The case of Juhayman Al-Utaybi, who carried out a famous hijacking of Al-Masjid Al-Haram, is an example of political grievances. Political grievances mixed with a misinterpretation of a hadith pertaining to the end of times. More specifically, the ahadith regarding the Mahdi. So Juhayman Al-Utaybi, firstly, he was born in the Qasim area, and he was born in 1936. So the details of this on page 44. In Qasim in Najd, and his father was a part of what was known as the Ikhwan. This should not be confused with Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which was founded by Hassan al-Banna, who passed away later in that same period in Egypt, who was in fact assassinated in around 1946. This movement, Ikhwan, is a different group. They rebelled against King Abdul Aziz. They had clashes. The father of Juhayman was from that group. And Juhayman himself, in fact, he joined the Saudi Arabian National Guards, serving from 1955 to 1973. So he has some military background in the Saudi National Guard. Later on, Juhayman Al-Utaybi joined a group known as Al-Jama'atu Salafiyya Al-Muhtasiba. And this group was founded by the students of the Salafi Sheikh Nasiruddin Al-Albani. And this organization had its funding secured by Abdul Aziz bin Baz. But eventually Juhayman Al-Utaybi broke away from this organization and formed his own cult with a few hundred young recruits. What I write on page 45, most of those who knew him, such as religious student Mutawalli Saleh. So this student, he was a part of the Al-Jama'atu Salafiyya Al-Muhtasiba, Mutawalli Saleh. He attests to the force of the personality and the devotion of Juhayman Al-Utaybi. So he states, and this is taken from his interviews, which are available, nobody saw this man but liked him. He was strange. He had what is called charisma. So in Arabic, they don't actually have a word for charisma. They actually utilize the English word charisma. He was true to his mission and he gave his whole life to Allah day and night. So what I write, however, for a religious leader, he was poorly educated. So Nasir al-Huzaymi, a close follower, former follower, he recalls regarding Juhayman. He states, Juhayman was keen to go to the isolated and rural areas where Bedouins live because his classical Arabic, Fusha, was weak, and having a strong Bedouin accent, he avoided addressing any educated audience to avoid being exposed. So he was not very educated, Juhayman Al-Utaybi. Now, this new group, they deemed the Saudi clergy, the Saudi ulama, as deviated and corrupt because of their allegiance to the Saud royal family. On moving to Riyadh, the group was investigated by Saudi security police, only to be later released. The strange aspect of Juhayman's cult was its association with apocalyptic events, and that is of course why we are covering this particular group. The appearance of the Mahdi and the new Islamic century. So 1979 and the Islamic New Year 1400 coincided. The year 1979 and the new Islamic century of 1400. The interesting part, when he goes to jail, while in custody for suspicious, subversive behavior, Juhayman met a man by the name of Muhammad bin Abdullah Al-Qahtani, of whom Juhayman claimed to have had dreams, interpreting them as meaning that Al-Qahtani was the promised Mahdi. Somehow, most likely through standard cult mind control and manipulation, Juhayman convinced Al-Qahtani that the latter was the Mahdi. Following this misinterpretation of hadith and misguided belief was the misapplication of the hadith regarding the name of the Mahdi being Muhammad and his father being Abdullah, with Al-Qahtani also claiming to be from the prophetic lineage known as Sayyid or Sharif. So Qahtani meets Juhayman Al-Utaybi in prison. Juhayman Al-Utaybi is already a part of a fringe group that has broken away from the main Saudi scholarship. But when he enters jail, he meets Muhammad Al-Qahtani, who claims to be a Sharif or a Sayyid from the lineage of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Juhayman believes that this man is the man he observed in dreams as being the Mahdi. And then there is also the interpretation of certain hadith. What occurs after that? Conveniently, rumors spread that hundreds of Meccans, people from Mecca, and pilgrims had seen Al-Qahtani in their dreams, standing tall in the Grand Mosque, meaning Al-Masjid Al-Haram, and holding the banner of Islam. Juhayman's followers were convinced. Mutawalli Salih, a member of the Al-Jama'atu Salafiyya Al-Muhtasiba group, recalls, "I remember the last meeting when a brother asked me, 'Brother Mutawalli, what do you think about the Mahdi?' I said to him, 'Excuse me, please don't talk about this subject.' Then someone said to me, 'You are a silent devil. Brother, the Mahdi is real, and he is Muhammad bin Abdullah Al-Qahtani.'" So already they break away from the mainstream, and what do? They interpret certain dreams as being a specific individual whom they believe to be Al-Mahdi, and they ostracize those who disbelieve in this. So what I write on this, on page 46, this esoteric, apocalyptic misinterpretation acted as a trigger for their political motivations and extremism in countering grievances against the Saud family. After a short disappearance into the desert, so Juhayman, after being released, he goes into the desert, where Juhayman and his cult members trained using arms. They had military training, a few hundred of them. They suddenly reappeared on the 1st of Muharram, so straight after the Hajj. After the Hajj is done, you know the Hujjaj, they gather in Makkah Al-Mukarramah in Al-Masjid Al-Haram. Juhayman Al-Utaybi, he reappears. 1st of Muharram is which year? The new year, the new Islamic year. So 1400, 1979. To lay siege to the Grand Mosque in Mecca. They had smuggled in armaments and supplies using coffins with the aid of security personnel who were either a part of the cult or who had sympathy for their cause. So there were people who administered some smuggling in of weapons into Al-Masjid Al-Haram. Then what occurs? Juhayman had convinced his cult members that this act of terrorism, or heroism as they would say, would bring about the epoch of the Mahdi, Armageddon, and re-establishment of the Caliphate. Juhayman was also convinced and persuaded others. But remember, what was he persuading them with? He was persuading them with dreams and misinterpretation of the ahadith. Yesterday we covered that this misinterpretation of ahadith or ayatul Quran, it falls as a glue, that which binds them to the ideology. That the new Islamic year and century would witness the appearance of the Mahdi as predicted in hadith literature. These delusions continued during the siege, when the group heard that an army was arriving to Mecca to do battle with them. Juhayman interpreted this as the army foretold in the hadith of Salama in Sunan Abi Dawud and others, that they would be dispatched against the Mahdi and subsequently swallowed. Now, what is that? There is a hadith in the Sunan that mentions that an army will head out towards Al-Masjid Al-Haram. This army will be swallowed in the desert, Al-Bayda. Juhayman Al-Utaybi had heard that the Saudi security forces were coming in order to remove his group, his terrorist group that had hijacked Al-Masjid Al-Haram. He interpreted that as being the army that will be dispatched. Has he fallen into a fallacy? The answer is yes. Later we will be covering the fallacies. What fallacies these groups are falling into. One of them is giving citation to a hadith in isolation, without all the hadith on that particular subject. Another fallacy is quoting the hadith partially, not quoting the entire hadith. So there are many fallacies. One of the fallacies is believing that you are bringing about the events of Ashratu Sa'ah. This is a qadari belief. It is not from the belief of Ahlul Sunnah. So on page 47, I give citation to the BBC report regarding these events that had occurred. What is mentioned is the preacher Khalid al-Yami, a follower of Juhayman, claimed that, and this is in Al-Masjid Al-Haram, so they bring in the weapons, they remove the imam, they hijack the masjid. In fact, during that time, Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Sabuni, rahimahullah, the mufassir of the Quran, was in the masjid at that particular time, at Salatul Fajr, and he states he was near the Mount Safa and Marwa, and he found a window, and because his head was small, he was able to fit through the window, and he says this was about the 4th or 5th time his life was saved. But he escaped during that hijacking. So when they hijack Al-Masjid Al-Haram, what occurs? The follower, Khalid al-Yami, a follower of Juhayman, claimed that countless visions have testified to the coming of the Mahdi. Hundreds of Muslims had seen him in their dreams, al-Yami said, and now he was in their midst. The Mahdi's name was Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Qahtani. Note here how they enforce the interpretation. They claim there are hundreds of dreams. They are utilizing the dreams as a proof. And he is claiming also that the Mahdi has arrived, ignoring all the other signs, because there are so many numerous signs. On page 48, I mention that when this Qahtani was struck by bullets, when he was hit, people started to shout, "The Mahdi is injured, the Mahdi is injured." Some tried to run towards him to rescue him, but the heavy fire prevented them from doing this, and they had to retreat. But Al-Qahtani's belief in his own invulnerability was unfounded, and he was soon struck by gunfire. They told Juhayman that the Mahdi had been hit, but he declared to his followers, "Do not believe them, they are deserters." So at that time, Al-Qahtani actually believed that he was the Mahdi. So what he did, instead of taking cover, because the Saudi government had placed snipers on the minarets and snipers around Al-Masjid Al-Haram, but instead of taking cover, what did Al-Qahtani do? Al-Qahtani ran around without taking cover, and eventually he was hit numerous times until he died. And then when the followers mentioned this to Juhayman Al-Utaybi, Juhayman said, "Do not believe them. Those followers who are stating this, they are deserters, they are deserting us." So this shows that Juhayman was in some type of denial. Juhayman was in a clear denial of what was occurring. Ultimately, the Saudi forces retook the Grand Mosque in Mecca, and most of Juhayman's cohorts were killed, including Al-Qahtani. The survivors were subsequently tried and executed. It is said that Juhayman was remorseful afterwards and spoke to his former teacher, Sheikh Muhammad Amin al-Shinqiti. So Sheikh Muhammad Amin, he talked to Juhayman before Juhayman was executed regarding forgiveness. Perhaps he had awoken from his self-concocted delusion. It seems he had realized he was not actually in the time of Al-Mahdi. So what I mentioned regarding that is that mental health and various other psychological and emotional issues play a major role in the motives of zealots who misinterpret religious texts in order to validate their extreme actions. And on page 49, I mentioned some of those gross misinterpretations. One of them I state, the second erroneous belief was the presumption that they themselves could bring about the events of the Mahdi or any foretold prophetic events. Actions performed like this are not by Allah when He wills and ordains is key to the nature of the incorrect beliefs held by such groups. So if you remember, in 2015, around that time, ISIS, they attempted to bar the Euphrates river water to bring about the Euphrates gold. That goes against the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. The events will occur when Allah wills. Humans do not bring about these events.